Picture this. It's 1996. A young child in Japan boots up their Game Boy, eagerly diving into the world of Pokémon Red. Everything seems normal at first. The cheerful 8-bit melodies, the colorful sprites, the promise of adventure. But then they reach Lavender Town. The music hits differently here. Instead of the upbeat tunes they've grown accustomed to, they're greeted by a haunting, almost discordant melody that seems to burrow into their mind. The child doesn't know it yet, but they've just encountered what would become one of gaming's most enduring urban legends, and it's only the tip of the iceberg when it comes to Pokémon's darker side. Welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving deep into the shadows of the Pokémon world, exploring the disturbing myths, controversial decisions, and genuinely unsettling lore that Nintendo probably wishes you'd forgotten about. From mysterious deaths to banned episodes, from creepypastas that blur the line between fiction and reality, to real-world controversies that nearly destroyed careers, we're about to uncover the darkest secrets hiding behind those innocent, colorful creatures. But before we begin our descent into Pokémon's most twisted tales, make sure you're subscribed and hit that notification bell. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming up in this series. Let's start where we left off, with Lavender Town, because this isn't just any urban legend. This is the myth that refuses to die, and for good reason. The story goes like this. In the original Japanese release of Pokémon Red and Green, the Lavender Town theme contained specific high-frequency tones that allegedly caused adverse reactions in children. We're talking about headaches, nausea, and in the most extreme versions of the legend, even suicides. The myth claims that dozens of Japanese children took their own lives after being exposed to these frequencies, leading Nintendo to quietly alter the music in later versions. Now, here's where it gets interesting and genuinely unsettling. While the mass suicide claims are completely fabricated, there's a kernel of truth buried in this legend that makes it far more compelling than your average creepypasta. The original Lavender Town theme DAD contained higher frequencies than other tracks in the game. This wasn't some sinister plot by Nintendo. It was likely just a stylistic choice to make the ghost town feel more eerie. But here's the thing about high-frequency sounds. They can genuinely cause discomfort in some people, particularly children, whose hearing is more sensitive to these ranges. Some players did report headaches and discomfort when playing through Lavender Town for extended periods. Nintendo, being the careful company they are, actually did modify the music slightly in later releases and international versions, reducing some of those harsh high frequencies. They'll tell you it was just for improved audio quality, but the timing is it. But here's what really makes this legend stick. Lavender Town was supposed to be disturbing. This is a town built around a massive graveyard where Pokémon are buried. The whole area is infested with ghost-type Pokémon, and the storyline involves the restless spirit of a Marowak seeking revenge for her murdered child. Nintendo wanted players to feel uncomfortable here. They just might have succeeded a little too well. The myth took on a life of its own in the early 2000s internet, with people claiming they had original copies of the game with the killer frequency intact. Countless forum posts described finding mysterious Game Boy cartridges at garage sales or in older siblings' collections, complete with fabricated screenshots of error messages and memorial screens for the supposed victims. What's truly dark about the Lavender Town syndrome isn't the myth itself, it's how it reflects our willingness to believe that something we loved as children might have been secretly harmful. It taps into that primal fear that our nostalgia might be poisoned, that the companies we trusted might not have had our best interests at heart. Speaking of Nintendo having legal troubles, let's talk about one of the most bizarre controversies in Pokémon history, the case of Uri Geller versus Kadabra. In the year 2000, famous psychic and spoonbender Uri Geller filed a lawsuit against Nintendo, claiming that the psychic-type Pokémon Kadabra was an unauthorized use of his likeness. And you know what? He had a point that was more solid than you might think. Kadabra's Japanese name is Yungara, basically Uri Geller with some syllables swapped around. The Pokémon carries spoons, just like Geller's trademark act. It has psychic powers, star symbols on its body, and even shares some physical characteristics with Geller's appearance. This wasn't subtle, this was Nintendo basically creating a Pokémon version of a real person without permission. But here's where it gets really dark. Geller claimed the portrayal was deliberately negative and damaged his reputation. He pointed out that in the Pokémon universe, Kadabra is often depicted as malicious, using its psychic powers to cause headaches and manipulate others. Essentially, Nintendo had turned him into a villain in their children's game. The lawsuit sought damages and demanded that Nintendo stop using Kadabra in their trading card game. And here's the kicker, they actually complied, at least partially. After 2003, Kadabra virtually disappeared from the Pokémon trading card game. For nearly 20 years, one of the most iconic Pokémon was essentially banned from one of the franchise's major components. This created a bizarre situation where Abra could evolve into Alakazam in the card game, but Kadabra, the middle evolution, was nowhere to be found. Players had to use special evolution cards or other workarounds. It was like Nintendo had erased Kadabra from existence in everything but the video games. The truly unsettling part, this case highlighted how easily a real person could be transformed into entertainment without their consent, and how that transformation could follow them for decades. Gola spent years being associated with a fictional creature that parents and children around the world knew better than they knew him. In 2020, Gola finally gave Nintendo permission to use Kadabra again, stating that he was tired of the negative impact the controversy had on fans. But the damage was done. An entire generation of Pokémon fans grew up in a world where Kadabra cards simply didn't exist, creating a strange hole in the franchise's history. Now let's venture into the realm of creepypasta, but with a twist, because the buried alive model isn't entirely fiction. The legend goes that deep in the code of the original Pokémon Red and Blue games, there exists unused data for a terrifying encounter. Players who used GameShark codes or ROM hacking tools claimed to discover a trainer called Buried Alive, a grotesque figure emerging from the ground in Pokémon Tower, accompanied by disturbing text and a team of ghost-type Pokémon with names like Death, Fear, and Hate. According to the creepypasta, encountering this hidden trainer would corrupt your save file and leave disturbing messages in your Pokédex. Some versions of the story claim that the encounter would cause your Game Boy to emit strange sounds or display corrupted graphics that would persist even after restarting. Here's what makes this story genuinely unsettling. Unused trainer data does exist in the original games. ROM hackers and data miners have found remnants of scrapped content throughout the code, including unused trainer sprites and incomplete battle scenarios. While the specific Buried Alive encounter as described in the creepypasta doesn't exist, the games are absolutely riddled with unused content that suggests Game Freak originally had much darker plans for certain areas. Some of this unused data is genuinely disturbing when you consider it was intended for a children's game. There are unused Pokémon cries that sound more like screams, unused trainer sprites that look far more menacing than anything that made it into the final game, and text strings that suggest storylines involving death and loss that go far beyond what we actually see in Lavender Tower. The most compelling evidence for the creepypasta's origins comes from unused music tracks found in the game's code. There are several incomplete audio files that sound like distorted versions of existing music, almost as if they were meant to play during corrupted or glitched encounters. One track in particular sounds like a slowed-down, distorted version of the Lavender Town theme, with additional discordant notes that make it genuinely unpleasant to listen to. But here's where the story gets really dark. The Buried Alive creepypasta became so widespread that it influenced actual ROM hacks and fan games. Creators began inserting their own versions of the encounter into modified games, complete with the exact effects described in the original story. This means that somewhere out there, modified Pokémon games exist that can actually traumatize players with disturbing imagery and sounds, turning the fictional horror into something real. The line between myth and reality became so blurred that even experienced ROM hackers began questioning whether they had encountered the real buried alive model or a fan creation. The creepypasta had essentially created its own reality, manifesting the very thing it claimed to document. This phenomenon speaks to something deeper about our relationship with childhood media. We want to believe that there are secrets hidden in the games we loved, even if those secrets are terrifying. The idea that developers might have included content too dark for children, then hidden it away, taps into our fascination with the forbidden and our nostalgia for a time when the digital world seemed full of undiscovered mysteries. While we're discussing the supernatural elements of Pokémon, we need to talk about how the series has consistently drawn from Japan's rich tradition of urban legends and ghost stories, sometimes in ways that are far more literal than Western audiences realize. Take the ghost girl in Lumio City from Pokémon X and Y. Players exploring the city might encounter a strange girl who floats across the screen, approaches the player character, and delivers the chilling message, "No, you're not the one," before disappearing. It seems like a simple Easter egg, right? A little spooky moment to surprise players. But this encounter is actually rooted in a specific type of Japanese urban legend called teke teke, stories about spirits of people who died in accidents and now seek specific individuals to either help them find peace or drag them into the afterlife. The girl's appearance, her floating movement, and especially her cryptic message about seeking the one are all classic elements of these traditional ghost stories. What makes this particularly unsettling is the context within the game world. Lumio City is based on Paris, a city with its own dark history of underground tunnels, catacombs, and unexplained disappearances. By placing a Japanese-style ghost in this setting, Game Freak created something that operates on multiple levels of cultural horror, familiar to Japanese players as a traditional yurei ghost, but alien enough to Western players to be genuinely unnerving. But the ghost girl isn't alone. Throughout the series, Pokémon has consistently included references to Japanese folklore that are much darker than they appear on the surface. The Yamask line, for example, isn't just ghost Pokémon, they're specifically based on the concept of Munbotokei, spirits of people who died without proper funeral rites and now wander the earth carrying the faces they had in life. Drifloon and Drifblim seem cute and harmless, but their Pokédex entries reveal they're based on the legend of children being spirited away by supernatural forces, a common theme in Japanese horror. The games specifically mention that Drifloon tries to lead children away by pretending to be a balloon, which connects directly to traditional warnings Japanese parents gave their children about mysterious floating objects. Perhaps most disturbing is Frostlass, whose design and behavior are based on the Yuki Onna, the snow woman of Japanese folklore, who appears beautiful but freezes travelers to death in blizzards. The Pokédex entries describe Frostlass as freezing prey and keeping them as decorations, which is remarkably close to the traditional Yuki Onna stories where victims are preserved in ice as trophies. These aren't just aesthetic choices, they're direct adaptations of stories that were originally told to teach children about real dangers, from getting lost in the wilderness to talking to strangers. By turning these cautionary tales into collectible creatures, Pokémon has essentially transformed warnings about death into entertainment. The truly dark aspect of this is how it's created a generation of international fans who are unknowingly collecting digital versions of figures from Japanese nightmare fuel. Children around the world have teams full of spirits of the dead, child-snatching demons and vengeful ghosts, completely unaware of the cultural weight these creatures carry. No discussion of Pokémon's dark side would be complete without addressing the content that was deemed too disturbing even for the franchise's standards, the banned episodes and heavily censored material that most fans have never seen. Let's start with the most infamous, Den-o Senshi Porygon, the episode that sent nearly 700 Japanese children to the hospital and effectively ended the career of an entire Pokémon species. On December 16, 1997, children across Japan settled in to watch what seemed like a normal Pokémon episode. The plot involved Ash and his friends entering cyberspace to help fix a problem with the Pokémon transportation system. But during a climactic battle scene, the animation featured rapidly flashing red and blue lights, a technique that triggered photosensitive epileptic seizures in vulnerable viewers. The immediate aftermath was catastrophic. Ambulances rushed to hospitals across the country as children experienced seizures, nausea, and temporary blindness. The media dubbed it Pokémon shock, and the incident made international headlines. The Pokémon anime was immediately pulled from the air for 4 months while experts investigated. But here's the truly dark part. The episode wasn't pulled just because of the seizures. When authorities reviewed the content, they found that the storyline itself contained themes they deemed inappropriate for children. The episode dealt with corporate corruption, the dangers of over-reliance on technology, and included imagery of Pokémon being trapped and experimented upon in ways that were more graphic than usual. Porygon, the featured Pokémon, became a scapegoat for the entire incident. Despite the fact that Pikachu's electric attack actually caused the flashing lights, Porygon and its evolutionary line were effectively banned from the anime. To this day, they've never appeared in another episode, making them the only Pokémon line to be completely erased from the show's continuity. But the Porygon episode wasn't alone. There are several other episodes that were banned or heavily edited before international release. Beauty and the Beach featured James with inflated breasts as part of a beauty contest, played for laughs in Japan but deemed inappropriate for Western audiences. The episode was initially banned entirely, then later aired with heavy edits that made the plot nearly incomprehensible. The Legend of Mini Ryu was banned for its excessive gun violence, featuring Team Rocket and various characters threatening each other with realistic firearms. What makes this particularly dark is that the episode was meant to teach children about the consequences of poaching and environmental destruction, but the violent imagery overshadowed the conservation message. Perhaps most controversially, several episodes featuring Jinx were banned or edited after complaints that the Pokémon's design was racist. This led to a bizarre situation where entire plot lines had to be rewritten or removed, and Jinx's appearance was retroactively changed from black to purple across all media. These bannings created a strange phenomenon, a generation of Pokémon fans who grew up with gaps in their understanding of the series' continuity. Characters would reference events that never happened in the versions they watched. Pokémon would appear briefly in background shots, but never be featured prominently. It was as if pieces of the Pokémon world had been surgically removed, leaving scars that longtime fans could sense, even if they couldn't identify what was missing. The most unsettling aspect of this censorship is how it revealed the cultural tensions within a global franchise. Content that was acceptable in Japan was deemed harmful in other markets, forcing creators to constantly second-guess themselves and creating multiple versions of truth within the same fictional universe. All of these myths and controversies might seem like harmless entertainment, but they've had real consequences for real people, and some of those consequences are genuinely disturbing. Let's talk about what happened to voice actor Maddie Blaustein, who voiced Meowth in the English dub for over a decade. As the banned episode's controversy grew, she found herself at the center of a harassment campaign by fans who blamed her for ruining the character through her interpretation. The harassment intensified when she came out as transgender, with some fans claiming that having a trans voice actor was part of a broader corruption of their childhood franchise. The stress from this harassment, combined with other personal struggles, contributed to her mental health decline. Blaustein died in 2008 at the age of 48, and while multiple factors were involved, those close to her have stated that the online harassment definitely took its toll. The Pokémon community had lost one of its most talented contributors to the very toxicity that these dark myths and controversies help fuel. Then there's the case of the Pokémon Go deaths, a series of incidents where the mobile game's mechanics led players into dangerous situations. While most of these were accidents or poor judgment, several cases involved people deliberately seeking out supposedly haunted locations mentioned in various Pokémon creepypastas, believing they might find rare Pokémon or experience paranormal activity. In Baltimore, a group of teenagers broke into an abandoned building after reading online that it was a real-life lavender town where ghost-type Pokémon appeared more frequently. One fell through rotted flooring and spent hours trapped in the basement before being rescued. In Japan, several incidents occurred where people visited actual cemeteries mentioned in fan theories, disturbing funeral services and causing genuine distress to grieving families. The spread of these dark myths has also contributed to a phenomenon psychologists call nostalgia corruption, where adults begin to reinterpret their childhood experiences through a darker lens, often leading to depression and anxiety about whether their positive memories were fake or manipulated. Support groups have formed online for people struggling with the realization that their childhood media might have contained disturbing elements they didn't recognize at the time. While this awareness can sometimes be healthy, it can also lead to a kind of retroactive trauma where people convince themselves they were harmed by media they previously enjoyed. Perhaps most concerning is how these myths have been weaponized by various groups to push broader agendas about media corruption, corporate manipulation, and childhood innocence. The same people who spread false stories about Pokémon causing suicides often promote conspiracy theories about other forms of media, creating a pipeline from harmless urban legends to genuinely harmful misinformation. So why do these dark Pokémon myths persist? Why do we continue to tell stories about killer frequencies, hidden trainers and banned content, even when we know they're not true? The answer reveals something fundamental about how we process childhood nostalgia in the internet age. These myths serve as a way to add complexity and depth to media that we've outgrown but still love. They allow us to maintain our connection to Pokémon while acknowledging that we're no longer the innocent children who first encountered these games. In many ways, these dark stories are our attempt to reconcile the gap between the simple joy we felt as kids and the complicated understanding we have as adults. We know that corporations aren't our friends, that entertainment is designed to make money, that our childhood experiences were carefully manufactured to create lifelong consumers. The dark myths of Pokémon are how we process that disillusionment without completely abandoning something we love. But there's a danger in this process. When we become too invested in these dark reinterpretations, we risk losing the genuine positive impact these experiences had on us. The friendships formed over trading cards, the creativity sparked by imagining our own Pokémon adventures, the simple joy of discovery. These things were real, even if the corporate motivations behind them were complex. The most important thing to remember is that myths like the Lavender Town Syndrome or the Buried Alive model tell us more about ourselves than they do about Pokémon. They reveal our anxieties about technology, our concerns about corporate manipulation, and our struggle to maintain wonder in an increasingly cynical world. The real darkness in Pokémon isn't hidden in unused code or high-frequency audio files. It's in our willingness to believe that something designed to bring joy must have a sinister purpose, that companies that entertained us must have been trying to harm us, that our positive memories must be based on lies. Understanding these myths, their origins, their spread, their real-world consequences, helps us navigate not just Pokémon's legacy, but the broader landscape of internet culture, where urban legends and conspiracy theories spread faster than facts, and where nostalgia can be both a comfort and a trap. The truth is, Pokémon has always contained dark elements, themes of loss, abandonment, environmental destruction, and corporate power. But these elements were included to add depth and meaning to the stories, not to harm children or manipulate them in sinister ways. The real horror isn't in what Game Freak hid from us. It's in what we've hidden from ourselves, about why we need these stories to be darker than they actually are. So there you have it, the darkest Pokémon lore you've probably never heard, and hopefully a new perspective on why these stories matter beyond their shock value. I want to hear from you in the comments. Which of these myths did you believe before watching this video? Have you encountered any dark Pokémon stories that I didn't cover? And most importantly, do you think understanding the truth behind these myths makes them less powerful, or does it somehow make them even more unsettling? If you enjoyed this deep dive into the shadows of the Pokémon world, make sure you're subscribed because we're just getting started. Next week we'll be exploring the disturbing implications of the Pokémon world's economy, because when you really think about it, Pokémon world, where children capture wild animals to make them fight for money, raises some pretty dark questions about society, labor, and what we're teaching kids about their relationship with nature. Well, stick around for the best Pokémon channel that exists, I guess. I mean, probably anyways.